We're going to start today by talking about three elements of visual design: textual, spatial, and graphic. The reason why I want to start here is because throughout this term you're going to be designing a variety of professional documents, and you're going to have to take into consideration how each of these elements of visual design impacts your writing and the message that you're trying to convey to your audience, right? So you're going to be thinking about in terms of access. Is my information accessible to my audience? And how can I use these elements of design differently to ensure that my message is coming across to who I want it to come across to? So let's start with textual. Textual, it's a writing class, right? So we're going to deal with the words first and foremost. Textual elements of design deals with the words and their appearance on the page. Okay, this can be manipulated in a variety of different ways. One of the most common ones that you're going to come across are typefaces or font styles. Right? Those are, the way that the actual words are going to appear on the page are going to be dependent on the typefaces. So you can have Times New Roman, Calibri, Arial, Helvetica. All of these are types of typefaces, right? The different types of typefaces that changes the way that the words look visually, right? Garamond and Times New Roman fall into a category known as serif fonts, right? Serif fonts are commonly going to be understood as those fonts that have the little footies on them, right? So if you take a look at Times New Roman, you're going to see those little flares, like those little footies. I like to call them little footies. Those are called serifs, right? The little footies on the bottom of your A, your M's, if it's lowercase, you'll have like the little bitty serifs on the bottom of those. The reason why we have these is back in ancient printing days, all right? So we're talking like, Ben Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac. When he was publishing back then, the printing presses used to have small letters, right? And you would have to actually align all of the letters with one another. The serifs made it very easy for the typesetters to actually put each of the letters in line with one another. And it created this virtual line to make sure that the typeface was going straight across, right? So it's not cockeyed or crooked or anything like that. It made it easier for them to typeset, and it also made it easier for the person to read, right? Because all of the serifs lined up to create lines, and it made it less likely that somebody was going to, as they're reading, their eye was going to skip a line. I'm sure that's happened to you. It's happened to me all the time, where I'm reading across, and every now and again my eye will jump up a line further, and that sentence doesn't make any sense, and I have to reread it and realize, oh, I just skipped a line. The serifs allow you in print documents, allows the eye to follow more easily, and it makes it less likely that somebody's going to have those kinds of readability issues. However, in the digital world, serifs can create some visual noise. So in the digital world, you can see a lot of text that use sans serif, right? Technically, it's French for without the serifs. So if you take a look at Calibri or Arial, you're going to see there's no footies on the bottom of those letters. Okay, it removes that additional visual noise. So there's pros and cons to it. Sometimes it's a little easier to read the sans serif in a digital text, but if you're reading a printed text, your eye is trained to follow those lines from the serifs, so the serifs actually make it more readable. So those are some of the design elements, the design decisions you're going to have to make. Sometimes you'll still see serif fonts used in the digital space, and sometimes it can work fine. Sometimes it creates too much noise, and sometimes it helps to kind of take those serifs away because it removes that one additional layer of visual stimuli. So when you start to think about textual elements of design, I want you to think about what kind of text are you creating? Are you creating a digital text that's going to live online, as people they're going to be reading that on the screen, or are people going to be reading this printed document that's going to be on paper in front of them? And those kinds of decisions, the thinking about those contexts, are going to determine what types of text you're going to include. How are the typefaces going to change? What typefaces are you going to use for which project? So those are some things I want you to think about. So textual elements of design deals largely with the word's appearance on the page, usually in the form of typefaces, font styles, and specifically in serif fonts and sans serif fonts. There are also things that we can do to manipulate those, like boldface. We can boldface a font style, or a typeface, and bold facing that manipulates the way that the words appear on the page. Italics would fall underneath that same category. All right. You can even also think about color, right? Changing the color of a text subtly can actually have a great effect. It adds a dimension of engagement for the reader. If you were reading along your resume, for example, it's really traditional to have a resume that's all in black and white. But every now and again, if you take a very subtle color change, like a dark blue or a dark green or some kind of color like that, and you use that on just the headers, not necessarily on everything else, but just on the headings, education, employment history, all those, headings. Those headings having a different color can actually help them to pop a little bit more. It adds another layer of interest for the eye, and the eye will linger on the page just a little bit longer, but in a good way, right? It also helps to make those headings stand out so that if somebody's skimming through, they can easily find the information that they want. Whereas if your headings are all in black as well, it could create a problem. Okay, not necessarily a huge problem, but it might just make it seem like those headings will blend in a little bit more with the body of the text. So textual elements of design have a huge impact on how we work with the text, how we interact with the text, and we need to think about that when we're designing a document in any professional context, because we want our document to be accessible to our reader. We want them to be able to understand what we're trying to communicate, and we want it to be a nice experience. We don't want to create something that's jarring or jolting or something that's going to create some problems for the reader. Okay. The second area of design that I want to talk about is spatial. All right. This is, you are given a certain amount of space, the page, right? And you have to determine how you're going to use that space. Spatial elements of design is all about using space effectively. All right. Now, when we start thinking about that, there are different ways that we can adjust a document. We can use indentation, right? We can center or justify a text. We can, when we're dealing with integrating graphics and stuff like that, we can wrap text, or we can have text go straight across. Basically, just how do you use the space? How do you make use of the limited space that you have? On a resume, for example, I'm going to just kind of use that as an example here because it's going to be the first thing that we're going to be talking about. But resumes have a very limited amount of space. Most of you are going to be restricted to one page. A few of you might be able to get away with 2 pages, but only in really unique situations where you have a lot of experience. But in the spatial elements of design, it comes into play really, really well when you're talking about a resume, because you only have 1 page to work with. And you have to use the space effectively so that the information that you're providing is accessible, it's readable, but you also want to use that space effectively so it's not like, so it's not empty, right? You want to use it to balance the white space with the actual text that you're including. And where are you going to place things? Are you going to keep the headings left aligned, or are you going to center your headings? There are reasons why you would do either or. Are you going to indent things underneath something else? So when you have bullets, are you going to have the bullets line up with the first letter, or are you going to just go with that default indent and allow the bullets to indent underneath? Again, there are rhetorical decisions that you have to make regarding how you use the space. One of the things that people rarely talk about, but it has a huge impact in professional writing, kerning. Most of you probably know what indentation is, right? Indentation is, bumping something in from the margin a certain amount of space, right? So when you indent a paragraph, if you're double spacing or single spacing, if you have a double spaced paragraph, you're going to indent it usually. If you're going to have a single spaced paragraph, you might not indent it, but you might skip an extra line in between the spaces to help those paragraphs stand out. But in any case, indentations, we know what those are, roughly. You know what the center, justify, left align things are all about, right? I think that's pretty standard stuff at this point. wrapping the text around a graphic or wrapping the text around a text box or something like that so that you have maybe a quote. Sometimes you'll see that in a magazine. They'll pull a quote out, they stick the big quote in the middle of the text, and then the column of text wraps around the quote. There's different reasons why you would do that, but that would be an example of a wrapped text where you're placing the text around another element. Kerning, though, it deals with the spacing between characters. So you can expand or condense kerning, right? You can increase more space or decrease the space in between characters. And that's usually used when we're justifying a text, right? If you select justify, your computer will automatically adjust the spacing in between characters so that your right margin and your left margin are straight lines all the way up and down, right? If you do left align, you're going to have that ragged edge over on the right-hand side, and everything in the left column will line up. And so that would be like normal kerning. In expanded kerning, that would allow you to justify a text to make sure that the columns straight up and down on the left and the right. You'll see that a lot in newsprint. If you're reading a newspaper article and they have those thin columns, a lot of times those columns will be justified because it's more reader-friendly, I suppose. It's using the space in a different way. So kerning, the spacing between characters, you can expand that, you can condense that as needed. All right, it's one of the reasons why when I started teaching professional writing, I stopped asking for page count and I just went to word count, because once I started talking to students about this, they started to expand the kerning, expand the spacing in between their characters, and I would have an 800-word document taking up 6 or 7 pages, and it looked a little funny, but there you go, kerning. Double spacing and single spacing, those are simple spatial elements of design that you use every day. Now we're going to go to the graphics. Graphic elements of design deal largely with images. Images and non-textual visuals, right? So we can deal with photographs. We can deal with, graphs, charts, tables can, in some cases, be considered a graphic element. We can talk about videos. If you decide to embed a video, especially online, you decided to embed a video, embedded videos. Those can be graphic elements. Things, if you think about resumes, you have graphic elements in those, lines. A line to separate a heading, to separate your heading out from, your contact information into the body of the text. A lot of times you'll have that line that separates out that header, right? And those lines can serve as an organizational tool, right? They help to kind of set things apart. So that's something to think about. Lines, bullets. Bullets are probably one of the most common graphics that we use every day that we take for granted. How do we use these? Bullets, again, are organizational, right? They help you to organize lists, they help you to organize details, and they do it in a graphic way, right? They use graphics in that sense. So anyway, those are the 3 elements of visual design that we're going to take into account whenever we're creating a document in this class. We're going to use them on resumes. We're going to come back to them on reports. How do we make a report readable for the executive who's going to be reading it, or the executive who might not necessarily read it but might need to peruse it, right? They might need to skim it for its, the findings that it's providing. But in any case, no matter what you're writing, whether it's online, in print, you're going to have to think about textual elements, spatial elements, and graphic elements, and you're going to need to make them work together in a way that allows you to communicate effectively with your audience. So, I wanted to give you that as a foundation. I want you to come back here and think about this actively as you're creating different texts. How can you adjust the typeface? What typeface is going to be best suited for your goals and your objectives? What spatial elements can we use to help organize our text, to set things out, to make it more visual, to make it more appealing, to make us want to read it? What kind of graphics can we include to help clarify our main points? What photographs or what graphs and charts and tables do we need to design? We're going to have a little unit where we're going to talk about the design of graphs, right? And so we want to talk about those graphic elements. How do we incorporate that meaningfully within the text so it makes sense, so it communicates effectively with our audience, and makes it engaging, right? The whole purpose of having graphic elements is to draw the reader in, to give them some supplemental information. So that's where we're starting out this term. If you have any questions about any of these things, let me know. But throughout this term, please think about textual, spatial, and graphic elements of design, and think about it actively, how you can use each of these elements to better communicate with your audience.